In World War II, there was a monster no German commander ever saw coming, because it was built from scrap metal and an idea the American troops initially laughed at. But within hours, that monster tore through 300 German strongpoints and flipped the entire Battle of Normandy on its head. At 05:58 a.m., under a sky still bruised from the night's artillery smoke, a Sherman tank idled helplessly in front of a hedgerow so dense it looked carved from iron. The engine growled, the treads clattered in place, but the tank did not move forward. It could not. The hedge was ancient, grown thick over centuries, a green wall older than the country of the men trying to break it. A sniper's bullet rang off the turret, a sharp metallic scream. Another followed, then another. Someone whispered inside the hull, "They've bracketed us already." The commander lowered himself into the cupola, breath held. He could hear the Germans adjusting their fire. They knew the pattern. They'd seen it all day yesterday, and the day before that. A Sherman approaches a hedgerow, tries to push through. Its nose lifts, its belly lifts with it, and the Germans fire straight into the weak spot. Every time, every tank. The loader wiped sweat from his face, though the morning air was cold. "We're stuck," he said quietly. "Feels like walking into a firing squad." The driver whispered, "Feels like volunteering for it." The paradox hung in the air. 33 tons of American steel, a gun that could tear apart a bunker, a crew hardened by training, all defeated by roots and branches. Not by a fortress, not by a weapon, by shrubbery. The Germans fired again. The shelling came closer now, methodical, confident. They knew the Americans were pinned by the living maze of Normandy. They knew the tanks could not maneuver. They knew where every tank would stall before it stalled. And the crew knew it too. The radio crackled. Someone shouted coordinates, but the words blurred with static and fear. A burst of machine gun fire sprayed the hedgerow, each bullet slicing leaves into drifting confetti. The gunner lowered his voice. "If they flank us with a Panzerfaust, we're done." The commander didn't answer. He didn't need to. Then, above the static, a new sound, a grinding, clanking growl, approached from the dirt road behind them. Another Sherman. The commander lifted his periscope. At first glance, the tank looked damaged, its bow mangled by jagged plates welded crudely across the front. Scrap metal jutted outward in sharp triangles, uneven, ugly, improvised. It looked more like a broken farm plow than a weapon of war. Something a mechanic might weld together out of frustration, not strategy. The loader blinked. "What the hell is that?" The gunner snorted. "Looks like someone stuck a gardening tool on a tank." But the strange tank kept coming. The Germans noticed it too. Their fire shifted instantly. Bullets sparked off the welded plates. Mortar bursts showered it in soil. Still it crept forward, refusing to stop. The tank paused for a breath, as if studying the hedgerow the way a bull studies a matador's cloth. Then its commander raised a fist, a signal as simple as it was reckless. The tank lunged, and the absurd happened. Instead of climbing the hedgerow and exposing its belly like every Sherman in Normandy, the strange tank dug into the greenery. Its welded blades sank deep into the roots. Branches snapped. Dirt exploded upward. The hedge didn't throw the tank back. It splintered under it. The tank wasn't climbing the wall. It was devouring it. A roar filled the field, half engine, half tearing earth. The crew in the first tank froze. The driver whispered, "It's cutting through." The loader, "That's not possible." The gunner, "It is now." The hedgerow split like a wound opening. The tank pushed through, shoving a centuries-old barrier aside in less than 10 seconds. On the other side, a German machine gun nest scrambled, shocked, blindsided. Their fields of fire had been designed for tanks coming over the hedge, never through it. The Sherman's 50 cal thundered. Then the main gun fired once, a single shot, final, decisive. Silence followed. A silence too deep for a battlefield. The tank reversed back through the ruined hedge, its blades dripping soil like blood from a predator's jaws. No cheering, no speeches, no explanation. Just the cold fact, it worked. The commander of the first Sherman stared at the impossible opening. For 2 days, the Allies had lost men trying to break these hedgerows. And this thing, this bizarre welded contraption, had just ripped one apart like wet paper. A second opening followed. Then a third. Each breach widened the battlefield. Each breach destroyed German assumptions. Each breach rewrote the rules of Normandy. The loader whispered, "Who built that thing?" No one answered. But behind the lines, a quiet sergeant named Curtis Culin, a man no one had listened to 2 days earlier, was waking up, unaware that his gardening tool idea had just altered the fate of an army. The commander leaned forward, watching the strange tank chew through another hedge. He felt something he hadn't felt since landing in France. Possibility. "Tell battalion," he said, "we're moving." And for the first time since D-Day, the Americans actually could. The commander's order hung in the cramped air of the Sherman like a promise. Or a dare. "We're moving." But the battlefield had no intention of letting them go easily. Even with the Rhino Tank carving gaps open like a mechanical battering ram, the Germans were already reacting. A whistle cut the air. Thin, distant, sharp. The loader recognized it instantly. Mortar fire. They've seen the breaches. The first round hit 50 yards behind them, a dull concussion that shook clumps of earth from the hedgerow overhead. The second landed closer. Too close. The ground lurched. The driver swore and gripped the controls. The Germans weren't panicking. Not yet. They were adjusting. They always adjusted. Across the other side of the hedge, unseen, but almost felt, an MG-42 crew repositioned. Their barrels scraped over the rim of a trench, searching for angles, searching for the new threat that had just rewritten their map. A weapon designed for open fields was now pointed into a maze coming apart faster than they could comprehend. The Rhino Tank, the strange beast of welded spikes, backed up again, turning slowly, hydraulics groaning. Its commander scanned the hedgerow for the next place to strike. The tank looked like a plow stitched together by desperation, but its movements now carried intent. Confidence. Purpose. A machine built in the dark, but made suddenly for daylight. The radio crackled, a shaken voice. "Be advised. Germans, shifting armor." The crew exchanged looks. Armor? Already? The commander rotated his turret a few degrees. The hedgerow ahead rustled, not from wind, but from boots moving behind it. The Germans were reinforcing, filling the gaps, trying to pin the Americans before the breakthrough widened beyond their control. The paradox tightened again. The Rhino Tank had opened a door. Now the Germans were racing to slam it shut. The infantry beside the tanks pressed tighter into the earth. One soldier lifted binoculars and whispered to no one, "They're coming in fast." His sergeant didn't look. They always do. The Rhino charged the next hedge. Sparks burst from its metal teeth as it hit a thicker patch, ancient roots fighting back like knotted muscle. The engine roared louder. Black smoke bled from the exhaust. The tank pushed harder. Inside the first Sherman, the driver muttered, "If that thing stalls, we're as good as dead." The gunner replied, "If it doesn't, the Germans are." A sudden burst of MG-42 fire tore through the top layer of brush, stitching the air with deadly precision. Tracers cracked against the Rhino's welded plates, ricocheting off in sharp, angry sparks. The Rhino didn't stop. Its blades ground deeper, ripping the hedge apart 1 stubborn inch at a time. Then, a breakthrough. A section of the hedge slumped inward like a broken rib cage. The Rhino surged through the gap and vanished into the green darkness on the other side. The commander of the first Sherman felt the moment like a pulse. "Driver, forward, now." The tank lurched ahead, its hull scraping branches as it slipped into the new cut. Leaves slapped against the armor. Darkness swallowed the periscope. It felt like entering a tunnel built by nature and war at the same time. The gunner whispered, "Germans could be 5 feet from us and we wouldn't see them." The commander replied, "Then shoot first." A shadow moved to their right, a shape low and crouched. "Contact!" the loader shouted. Before the commander could give the order, a burst from the Rhino's coaxial gun up ahead lit the hedge in strobing flashes. The silhouette crumpled. The crew exhaled as one. The Rhino emerged into an open patch, a tiny field no larger than a tennis court. Perfect kill zone, perfect ambush site. But this time the ambush wasn't German. The Americans spilled through the gap behind the Rhino, forming a wedge of armor and infantry. A new rhythm pulsed through the line. Movement instead of stagnation. Forward instead of stuck. Assault instead of attrition. On the opposite side of the field, the Germans appeared. 3 men scrambling behind a log, hauling a Panzerfaust. Their hands shook. Their plan was collapsing faster than they could react to it. The Rhino didn't give them a second chance. Its 50 cal opened fire, a hammering roar that echoed between the hedgerows like thunder trapped in a box. The Germans scattered, too late. The weapon tore through the log, through the Panzerfaust, through the field. The infantry advanced. The tanks followed. The line moved. The commander stared across the clearing, watching the impossible unfold in real time. 2 days of stalemate undone in minutes. A battlefield no longer shaped by German advantage, but by American improvisation, by a ridiculous welded idea no one believed would work. A mortar round crashed somewhere behind them. The ground shook again. The Germans weren't giving up. They were adapting, reforming, threatening to box them in from the flanks. The commander keyed the radio. "All units, stay tight. Keep pushing. Use the Rhino. Let it open the way." But even as he spoke those words, a creeping thought tightened in the back of his mind. This was only the first field. The hedgerows stretched for miles, and somewhere in that maze, German armor was waking up. The tank column pushed forward, the Rhino tearing another gash into the hedgerow ahead. But even as the opening widened, the commander felt the pressure of something bigger, something older than this morning's fight. The hedgerows were not obstacles. They were a centuries-old trap, and the Germans had turned them into a weapon as lethal as any cannon. Every gap the Rhino carved felt like stealing breath from an enemy that had expected them to suffocate. But none of this, none of the movement, none of the momentum, was supposed to be possible. 2 days earlier, before the Rhino existed, before anyone imagined defeating the hedgerows with welded scrap metal, the American advance had looked very different. The flashback didn't come as memory. It came as the landscape itself. Every field boxed in by walls of earth. Every lane a perfect kill corridor. Every opening a graveyard where a tank had tried and failed to force its way through. 2 mornings before, at 0420, Normandy had looked calm, deceptively calm. Mist drifted over meadows split by hedgerows taller than a man. The fog hid the German firing positions, their foxholes dug into the natural folds of the land. Allied infantry crouched behind an untouched hedge, exhausted, staring at the impossible barrier. A lieutenant had said it aloud then, voice low, bitter. "Feels like fighting inside a coffin." He wasn't wrong. Normandy's bocage country had been farmland once, a patchwork of ancient property lines. But the Germans had spent 4 years turning it into a fortress. Machine guns waited behind every corner. Mortars were zeroed on every lane. And the terrain favored men who knew every inch of it. The first tank to try breaching that hedge had done exactly what all Shermans did, climbed. Its bow rose toward the sky, its belly tilted upward. It exposed everything, and a single German round burned through its underside, killing the engine and the crew before the tank even finished climbing. The sergeant watching it, the same quiet, sharp-eyed sergeant no one ever noticed until he spoke, was Curtis Culin. He didn't shout, didn't swear, didn't gesture. He just stared at the wreckage as smoke drifted across the leaves and men pulled bodies from the hull. Someone beside him muttered, "These damn hedges. They beat tanks and rifles and artillery." Another said, "Unless someone invents a hedge-eating monster." They all laughed, except Culin. Later, when the jokes died, the frustration didn't. The infantry couldn't keep advancing. The tanks couldn't protect them. The enemy set every angle, dictated every approach, controlled every battlefield variable. That night, in a makeshift bivouac lit by weak lanterns, the officers argued tactics. Flank left, flank right. Blow the hedge with explosives. Dig beneath it. Ram through it. Burn it. Nothing worked. Nothing changed the simple physics of the terrain. A colonel finally slammed a map down and said, "We have superior numbers, superior firepower, and we are losing to bushes." Silence followed. A heavy, thick silence no one could break. And then Cullen spoke. "Why don't we cut through them?" The officers stared. Someone laughed under his breath. Someone else shook his head. The colonel muttered, "Cut them? With what? Prayers?" Culin didn't smile. He walked to the edge of the tent, grabbed a bent piece of German beach obstacle, twisted metal hauled inland from Omaha Beach, and held it up. "With this," he said, "we weld blades, here and here. Make the tank bite the hedge instead of climb it." The room blinked at him. Someone chuckled. Someone else scoffed. A captain said, "Sergeant, this is a battlefield, not a farm. We're not plowing fields." But the colonel watched the metal in Cullen's hand and didn't laugh. Cullen kept going, voice even. "The hedge is only dangerous because we ride up it. Remove the angle, and the Germans lose the shot. Force the tank through the base. Teeth, sir. We need teeth. The idea sounded ridiculous, crude, primitive. A joke more than a plan. But the colonel nodded slowly. Show me. They gave Culin a wrecked Sherman, a welder, and 2 mechanics who thought the whole assignment was punishment disguised as engineering. The first prototype looked terrible. Uneven blades, lumps of metal burned into the hull, jagged teeth pointing in every direction like drunken fangs. When they rolled it out at dawn, soldiers gathered to look. Someone whispered, "It'll fall off in the first minute." Someone else, "Looks like something a drunk farmer would build." Even the mechanics who welded it weren't sure it would survive the first push. But Culin walked around the tank as if he saw something the others couldn't. Not a contraption, not desperation, but a solution. He tapped the metal once with his knuckles. "As long as it cuts," he said. "We're not trapped anymore." They tested it on a hedgerow just beyond camp. The tank roared forward, blades hitting wood and earth. Dirt flew, branches tore. The hedge shook like a beast waking up. And then, unbelievably, the hedge split. The tank rolled through. No explosion, no German shot, just the sound of centuries-old roots breaking. Word spread like wildfire. Some still mocked it. Some doubted it. Most simply stared. But one officer summed it up better than anyone. "If this works in combat, the Germans won't understand how we got behind them." They didn't. Not then. Not this morning. Not now, as the Rhino cut its 4th hedge in a row. The flashback dissolved as the commander's Sherman burst out of another newly carved opening. The enemy ahead scrambled, confused, reacting wrong because Culin had changed the rules. The commander exhaled. "We're living inside that sergeant's idea," he murmured, "and the Germans don't know it yet." The Sherman rumbled out of the breach, treads grinding over churned soil, but the commander's thoughts clung to the same name echoing across every radio channel now. Culin, a sergeant, a mechanic, a nobody in the grand machinery of war. And yet, the battlefield was bending around an idea only he had dared to say aloud. But Culin's path to this moment had not begun in Normandy. It had begun long before. In quiet moments no one noticed, in habits no one admired, in frustrations that brewed long before the invention that would tear the hedgerows apart. Back home, before the war, Culin had been the sort of man people underestimated. Not for lack of intelligence, that wasn't the problem. The problem was that he noticed things most others ignored. The angle of a plow blade, the resistance of soil when it rained, the way certain roots broke clean while others held strong. He had no agricultural background, but he had a mechanic's mind, a habit of breaking things down, finding the point of failure, and rebuilding them stronger. When he joined the army, he didn't carry himself like the loudest man in the room. He wasn't reckless, wasn't boastful, wasn't eager to prove himself. He simply worked, quietly, methodically. He learned the Sherman inside and out, not because someone told him to, but because he wanted to understand why it behaved the way it did under pressure. Men in his unit joked that Culin could hear a mechanical problem before it happened. They teased him for the way he tapped the hull like a doctor checking a heartbeat. He never complained, never raised his voice. He existed in the background, the man who solved problems no one else cared to notice. But war has a cruel way of dragging unnoticed men into moments they never asked for. 2 weeks before the Rhino idea took form, Culin had watched a Sherman get knocked out trying to force a breakout near a sunken lane. The tank reared, belly exposed, and a Panzerfaust hit with terrifying precision. The explosion didn't just kill the tank, it killed 4 infantrymen walking beside it. Culin remembered their silhouettes thrown through the air, their helmets tumbling like discarded tin. Later, after the smoke settled, he wandered the edge of the lane alone. He kicked at the root that had stopped the tank, the single, stubborn, ancient root. He crouched, touched the edge of the torn soil. The tank hadn't been defeated by the Germans alone. It had been defeated by the terrain the Germans knew how to weaponize. He ran his hand across the hedge, feeling the density, the tangled strength. And then he whispered a line no one heard. "It's not the Germans we're losing to, it's the angle." He didn't explain it yet, not even to himself. But the seed of the idea lived in that moment. A problem searching for the right shape. That night, when others slept, he sat with a small notebook, sketching rough shapes, blade angles, leverage points. He tore the page out, crumpled it, started again. He wasn't designing a weapon. He was solving a geometry problem. When the colonel later asked for ideas, Culin wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't thinking about praise or recognition. He simply spoke because no one else was seeing what he saw. "We're not cutting the hedge," he said. "We're climbing it. That's the mistake." No one understood. They dismissed him. But the colonel saw something in Culin's eyes, not confidence but certainty. So they gave him the wreck, the welder, the scrap metal. And the first night of welding was chaos. The sparks flew unevenly. The metal smoked. The heat distorted the edges. One mechanic muttered, "We're building a joke." Another said, "Might as well paint flowers on it if it's going to act like a garden tool." But Culin didn't laugh. Every weld was intentional. Every angle mattered. He cut away pieces and re-welded them, adjusted the tilt, trimmed jagged points with a torch. From the outside, it looked like improvisation. Inside his mind, it was math. When they stepped back at dawn, the tank looked absurd. A Sherman wearing scrap like a makeshift jaw. No symmetry, no elegance. But Culin looked at it like a man examining a completed equation. "Try it," he said. And when it worked, when the hedge split under the blades, the mechanics turned to him in disbelief. One whispered, "You actually solved it." Culin didn't smile. He simply wiped the sweat from his face and whispered back, "We're not here to look pretty. We're here to move." Now, as miles of hedgerows shattered under the force of the Rhino tanks rolling ahead of the commander's Sherman, the truth crystallized. The entire breakthrough depended on a man most of the army didn't know by name. A sergeant with no authority had altered the battlefield more than any general, and the Germans still didn't know why their perfect terrain advantage was collapsing. They still didn't know whose mind had cut open the bocage. They were reacting, but they weren't understanding. And in war, the difference between reacting and understanding is survival. The commander watched another hedgerow explode into fragments under the Rhino's blades and realized something else. Culin's idea wasn't just a tool, it was an attack on German certainty. The Germans weren't afraid of Shermans, but they were afraid of what they didn't expect. And suddenly the Americans had become unpredictable. The Rhino tank tore another ragged wound through the hedgerow, spilling sunlight onto the shadowed field beyond. The commander's Sherman followed close, turret swiveling, barrel hunting for threats hidden in the green labyrinth. The infantry pressed forward beside the tanks, breath low, bodies tight, stepping over broken branches and churned soil still trembling from the passage of steel. But the hedgerows were not done fighting. Ahead, the next field lay too quiet. A rectangular patch of grass bordered by walls of green that rose like the ribs of some buried giant. The Rhino paused at the edge of this unnatural arena. Its engine rumbled. Its blades dripped dirt. For the first time, hesitation flickered through the line. The commander felt it. Everyone did. "This one's wrong," he muttered into the intercom. The Americans had been cutting corridors for an hour now, pushing deeper, breaking patterns the Germans relied upon. But this field felt prepared, scripted, designed. The Rhino edged forward anyway. A single shot cracked from the far hedge. Not a machine gun, something heavier. A sharp, dense impact slammed into the Rhino's upper glacis and skidded off. The sound was unmistakable. German anti-tank fire. "Contact front!" the commander barked. The Rhino didn't pull back. Instead, it revved its engine and began angling toward a thinner patch of hedge to the left, a new breach point. Its blades lowered, poised to bite. The Germans were faster this time. A second shot thundered, tearing through branches, skipping off the Rhino's welded plates, and burying itself in the soil behind the tank. Too close. Far too close. The gunner in the commander's Sherman tightened his grip. "They're zeroing us." The infantry ducked behind the stump of a shattered hedge, eyes flicking to the left flank. Something moved behind the leaves. Shadows slipping between roots and brush. German grenadiers. "Left side, movement!" a private shouted. The commander rotated the turret, scanning the hedge. Nothing. Only stillness and green. Normandy hid everything except danger. Then the Germans made their second move. 2 MG-42s opened fire at once, stitching the clearing with arcs of tracers so fast they seemed like continuous beams. Soil erupted. Bark flew. A soldier screamed. The Americans dove behind anything that resembled cover. The commander's Sherman returned fire, 30 caliber rounds hammering the hedgerow. The MG-42s paused, not silenced, just shifting position. They always shifted. The Rhino committed to the new breach. It lurched forward, teeth grinding through the roots, engine straining under the effort. But this hedge was thicker, reinforced by German shovel work. Roots braided like rope, earth packed tight. The Rhino's blades bit deep, but didn't break through on the first try. The commander felt his stomach drop. They reinforced it. They knew someone might try cutting. The second Sherman angled toward the Rhino, providing cover fire. The infantry crawled closer, using the tank as a shield. Mortar rounds began dropping into the field. Thump, 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 each one closer than the last. The Germans were no longer reacting. They were trying to choke the breakthrough at its throat. The Rhino reversed, treads biting into soft soil. Its commander shouted something the American infantry couldn't hear, but the meaning was clear. Again. Hit it again. The Rhino lunged forward a second time, blades screaming as metal tore against roots. A shower of dirt exploded upward. The hull shook under the strain. The field echoed with the grinding moan of metal assaulted by earth. A single Panzerfaust streaked out of the far hedge, a bright tongue of fire. "Faust, Faust!" someone yelled. The Rhino didn't see it. It couldn't. But the commander's Sherman did. The gunner fired as fast as muscle memory allowed. A burst of 30 cal that rattled the turret and chewed the hedgerow where the flash had come from. At the same time, the loader reached for a high-explosive shell with hands that were all instinct and fear. The Panzerfaust missed, barely, hissing past the Rhino's right track and detonating against a tree stump in a roar of fire and splinters. The hedgerow lit orange for a heartbeat. Then the Rhino struck a third time. This time the earth gave way. The hedge cracked open with a noise like splitting stone. Branches collapsed inward. A curtain of roots peeled back. The Rhino surged through the breach, punching into the next field. It vanished behind the disintegrating green, emerging in a cloud of dust and leaves on the other side. The MG-42 crews had been preparing an ambush there. They hadn't prepared for a tank to erupt through the hedge at waist height. Their firing lanes were wrong. Their angles were wrong. Their positions were exposed. The Rhino's coaxial gun shredded the first nest before the Germans even finished turning. The infantry stormed through behind it. The commander's Sherman rolled into the breach, turret snapping right then left as the Germans scattered. A machine gun burst raked the field, but this time the Americans weren't pinned. They had angles now. Real angles. A battlefield unfolding on their terms, not dictated by German geometry. Still, danger pressed in from every direction. Mortars were walking closer, adjusting rhythmically. Somewhere beyond the next hedge, the unmistakable engine growl of armored vehicles rumbled. Low, heavy, predatory, German reinforcements. The maze was fighting back with everything it had. The commander keyed the radio. "All units, form up behind the Rhino. Keep moving, don't stop. They're trying to box us in." But even as he said it, he realized something chilling. The Germans weren't simply defending anymore. They were anticipating, learning, adapting. The breakthrough wasn't secure. It wasn't even stable. It was a race, and the Germans were accelerating. The commander steadied himself as the Sherman rolled into position behind the Rhino, the treads grinding through the ragged breach. The enemy fire had not stopped, not even slowed. The Germans were tightening their perimeter, closing in like a fist around the fragile corridor the Americans had carved. Every second felt stolen, borrowed, fragile. The infantry regrouped beside the tanks. Their breaths came in short, sharp bursts. Their faces were smeared with dust and green sap from the hedges. But behind the exhaustion, something else glimmered. Momentum. The kind of momentum soldiers recognize instinctively, like a breeze shifting before a storm. The Rhino's commander leaned out of his hatch and shouted across the line, voice hoarse, urgent. "Next hedge is thicker, stronger. They're reinforcing the gaps." He wasn't guessing. The Germans had realized what the Rhino was doing, cutting their map into useless pieces. And now they were digging, bracing, fortifying roots with logs and dirt. The terrain was changing in real time, bending against them. The commander of the Sherman keyed the radio. "All units, listen. We don't hold this corridor, we die in it. We push, we drive, we do not stop." A mortar round landed at the far end of the field, showering them with dirt. Another hit seconds later. The Germans were walking fire inward, closing the bracket. The artillery observers had figured out the Americans' trajectory. The clock had begun. The Rhino backed up, engines snarling, readying itself for another strike. But the next hedgerow was different. Taller, thicker, reinforced by horizontal logs. A wall behind a wall. The infantry lieutenant approached the commander, voice low but steady. "We break through that. We hit the German reserve line. And if we don't? Then the reserve line hits us. Neither man pretended to be optimistic. The Rhino revved again, its hull vibrating. Its welded blades were bent now from the last impact, edges blunted, teeth cracked. It looked wounded, but determined. The commander studied the hedgerow. The Germans were moving behind it, their shadows flickering through breaks in the leaves. Rifles, helmets, the glint of metal. They were preparing to meet the Rhino head-on this time, not with confusion, but with calculation. It wouldn't be enough to send the Rhino charging blind into that wall, not now. The Germans were expecting it. They needed a plan. Something fast, something unorthodox, something that matched Cullin's thinking. The commander spoke into the radio. "Rhino, hold position. We need infantry up front. We're not punching through without clearing the flanks." Time bled away as they waited. The mortar pattern tightened again, closer, sharper, creeping toward the tanks like footsteps. The infantry split into two squads, hugging the edges of the hedge, moving low and fast. The maze swallowed them instantly. The commander listened to their movement through the radio. Faint breaths, fabric brushing leaves, the click of a safety. Then, left flank clearish, movement deeper in the brush. Right flank, we've got wire, tripwire. They're setting traps. The Germans were turning the hedgerow into a kill chamber. A burst of MG fire erupted from the right, tearing the branches above the infantry. They flattened instantly, returning fire blindly. The hedgerow absorbed sound, twisting echoes into misdirection. Another voice crackled, "They're preparing crossfire. 2 MG-42s, maybe 3. The commander felt the pressure tightening. "We don't have time for a clean fight. Rhino, prepare to cut." The Rhino advanced a few feet, blades angled toward the reinforced base. But the Germans struck first. 3 Panzerfausts fired almost simultaneously from staggered positions behind the hedge. Bright tongues of fire lanced through leaves, streaking toward the Rhino. The commander shouted, "Down! Down! Down!" The Rhino swerved as much as a tank could swerve. The first Panzerfaust missed by inches, slamming into the ground and erupting into a geyser of soil. The second skidded across the Rhino's armor, detonating on the far side in a burst that rocked the machine violently. The third hit a log embedded in the hedge, a thick reinforcement beam, and exploded outward, showering the infantry with splinters. A private screamed. Another dragged him back, blood streaking the grass. The Rhino held position, smoke rising from its right side. It was still alive, still moving. But its welded blades and its teeth had been bent out of alignment. It could still cut, but not straight, not clean. The crew inside knew it too. The engine revved again, louder, strained, like an animal pushing past injury because stopping meant death. The commander saw it clearly. If the Rhino didn't cut this hedge open, the Germans would surround them inside the bocage and crush them. He inhaled once. "Rhino, on my mark!" But another obstacle revealed itself before he could finish. On the far side of the field, beyond the hedge they needed to breach, came the unmistakable sound of something heavy. Armored, tracked, deliberate. Not infantry, not mortars, not machine guns. A German tank. The ground trembled faintly under the pressure of its advance. Leaves quivered. Birds scattered upward. The Americans froze. The infantry lieutenant whispered, barely audible, "Panzer." No one could see it yet. The hedgerow hid everything. That was the danger. A German tank could sit just beyond the wall, its cannon perfectly aligned with the breach point, waiting to destroy the first Sherman that dared cross. The Rhino could cut a hole, but a German tank could erase everything waiting behind that hole. This wasn't a fight anymore. This was a race, and the Germans were putting their heaviest pieces on the board. The commander tightened his grip on the hatch rim and spoke into the radio, voice no louder than a breath but harder than steel. "All units, prepare to force the next hedge. We either break through now, or we never do." He paused, listening to the distant engine rumble. "And pray that Panzer is slow." The Rhino's engine growled back to life, trembling with damage, with defiance, with something almost human. The refusal to die before finishing the job. The countdown had begun. The Rhino edged forward, smoke leaking from its right side in thin, wavering ribbons. Its blades were bent, its armor scorched, its exhaust sputtering, but it moved anyway, a wounded creature refusing to lie down. The infantry tightened around the tanks, forming a staggered crescent. Rifles aimed into the hedgerow shadows where the Germans were gathering strength. The ground trembled again. The Panzer was closer now. Not far, not hidden by caution, but approaching with the deliberate rhythm of something that believed the battle already belonged to it. Each vibration was a heartbeat, counting down the seconds before it arrived at the hedge that separated the two armored lines. The commander exhaled slowly. We're out of time. Mortars whistled overhead, smashing into the field behind them. The bracket had closed. There was no room to retreat, not unless they wanted to run backward into artillery fire. The Germans had shaped the battlefield, tightening it like a vice. The Rhino inched closer to the reinforced hedge. Its engine howled, the metal groaning with each movement. The infantry lieutenant whispered toward the commander, "If the Panzer reaches the other side before we cut through, we'll be staring down an 88. Everyone knew what that meant. No Sherman survived an 88 at close range. Not in Normandy. Not anywhere. Another vibration rolled through the soil. Closer. Heavy. Confident. The German tank wasn't being cautious. It was hunting. The commander keyed the radio, voice low but sharp. "All tanks. Guns ready. When the hedge breaks, fire blind into the left quadrant. Do not wait for visual." The gunner frowned. "Shoot blind? Better than dying polite." The Rhino positioned itself directly before the thickest root cluster. The metal teeth, bent and twisted, looked like broken fangs. But the crew inside didn't flinch. They'd welded the blades. They knew their limits. They also knew their purpose. The Rhino backed up 6 feet, the maximum space the field allowed. The commander watched it, breath shallow. "This is it," he whispered. The Rhino revved once, twice. The engine trembled like something being wound too tight. Then it charged. The impact shook the soil. Roots cracked. Earth erupted. The reinforced logs shivered under the force of 30 tons hitting them at full acceleration. The Rhino's blades plunged deep, metal screaming against stubborn wood. But the hedge didn't split. Not fully. Not yet. The Rhino reversed again, engine coughing, tracks slipping in the torn mud. The Germans fired from the right hedge, MG bursts slicing through the leaves, chattering against the Rhino's flank. The infantry returned fire, suppressing as best they could, bullets snapping inches above their helmets. The ground vibrated again. Closer! The Panzer was nearly in position. The Americans could feel it the way they felt danger before seeing it. An intuition carved by fear and survival. The lieutenant yelled toward the Rhino, "Hit it again!" The Rhino revved, a sound that seemed more like defiance than mechanics, and lunged forward. This time the impact shook the entire wall. Logs snapped in half. Roots tore free of the earth with a wet ripping sound. A cloud of dirt exploded outward, showering the field in chunks of ancient soil. Still, the hedge held. Barely. But the Rhino was out of distance. It couldn't reverse any farther. The field behind it had collapsed into churned mud. There was no room for one more charge. The Germans realized it too. A Panzerfaust fired from the far end of the hedge. The flash was near invisible behind the leaves. Only the faint roar gave it away. The projectile streaked toward the Rhino. The commander's gunner fired instinctively, sending a burst of 30 cal through the hedge. The bullet stream deflected the Panzerfaust just enough. It skimmed the Rhino's left blade, detonating against the dirt with a blast that rattled both tanks. Shrapnel clanged against the commander's turret. The loader yelled, "Rhino can't take another one!" The Rhino still didn't back down. Its engine roared again, a wounded animal refusing surrender. But there was no space to build momentum. The hedge needed a final blow, a decisive strike, and the Rhino couldn't give it. The commander saw it in an instant. "Driver," he said coldly. "Sir, we're helping it." The Sherman lurched forward, treads spraying mud. It positioned itself beside the Rhino, angled slightly, hull facing the hedge. The gunner blinked, confused. "We're ramming with a Sherman?" "Yes." "Sir, the belly—" "I know. The belly armor would be exposed, but there was no other choice." The lieutenant realized the plan. His face tightened. "If the Panzer fires now—" But there was no time to finish the thought. The commander gripped the hatch rim, breath sharp. "Driver, 3 seconds. On my mark." Behind the hedge, the Panzer's engine revved deeper. The final note before firing. 3 seconds, no more, no less. 3, the commander whispered. The Rhino revved beside them, matching the rhythm without needing words. 2. The infantry braced behind the tanks, crouched low, rifles steady. 1. The commander dropped his hand. "Mark." Both tanks surged forward in unison, the wounded Rhino and the Sherman beside it, striking the reinforced hedge with the combined force of nearly 60 tons of steel. The world erupted. Roots snapped like tendons. Logs split down the middle. Dirt blasted upward in a violent spray. The hedge didn't just break, it burst, exploding open in a shower of soil and wood. And through the collapsing greenery, revealed at last, stood the dark, looming silhouette of the Panzer, its cannon already halfway through the motion of turning toward them. The Sherman's gunner had 1 second, maybe less. The hedge blew outward in a violent spray of roots and dirt, the green wall collapsing like a demolished bunker. The Rhino skidded sideways from the impact, its left blade bent almost flat, steam venting from a ruptured hose. The commander's Sherman slid into the breach beside it, treads clawing for traction in the churned earth. And there, framed by the floating debris, half shrouded in dust, the Panzer appeared. Not imagined, not whispered, not sensed through the soil. Real. A squat, brutal silhouette painted in dark yellow, its armor caked in dried mud, its cannon extending like a spear aimed at the breaking point of the American line. A Panzer IV, late model, long-barreled. The kind that killed Shermans from distances where Shermans barely scratched paint. The commander's breath froze. The Panzer's turret stopped turning. It had already found them. For one impossible heartbeat, the battlefield went silent. No mortar, no machine gun, no shouting. Just the hiss of settling dust and the low metallic growl of a German engine idling before the kill. Inside the Sherman, the gunner whispered, "I've got him." "No," the commander snapped. "You don't. He has us." The Panzer's gun stabilized, locking onto the Sherman's exposed front plate. At this range, armor thickness didn't matter. Angle didn't matter. Nothing mattered. One shot, one flash, and the Sherman would burn. But something shifted in that single frozen second. The Rhino, still smoking, still bleeding coolant, still bent and battered, yet alive. The Rhino lurched forward, its ruined blades dragging through the dirt as it pushed its hull into the breach, blocking part of the Panzer's view. An act that no manual taught, no tactic required, no doctrine expected. A crippled tank inserting itself into the line of fire to buy a second of time. 1 second. Sometimes that was everything. The Panzer fired. The flash was blinding, a white-orange lance erupting from the German cannon. The Rhino took the hit square in its front plate. The impact roared like thunder rolling across metal hills. The entire tank shuddered violently, armor buckling inward. Steam and flame burst from the engine deck. The shockwave punched the Sherman's hull, rocking it sideways. Inside the Rhino, no one survived the hit, but the tank didn't fall backward. The strike lodged it deeper into the breach, its dead weight blocking the Panzer's immediate line of fire. A shield created by sacrifice. The commander didn't waste the moment. "Gunner, now!" The Sherman's 75mm cannon fired, the recoil hammering through the turret. The shell screamed through drifting dirt, but struck the Panzer's glacis at a shallow angle. Too shallow. Sparks exploded. The round ricocheted upward into the hedge above the German tank. "Loader! He ready! Again!" But the Panzer was already rotating its turret, trying to reacquire the kill angle. If the Rhino hadn't taken the shot, the Sherman would have been destroyed. If the Sherman didn't fire again now, the next round from the Panzer would finish them anyway. Another vibration rolled across the ground. The German tank adjusting its tracks, inching into a better position, pushing its barrel past the Rhino's dead hull. The commander shouted, "Gunner, left 3 degrees, aim for the lower plate!" The gun swung, searching through drifting earth, smoke, and shadow. The Panzer's outline reappeared, clearer now, its cannon rising toward them. "Fire!" The second Sherman shot tore through the dust cloud, hitting low, exactly where the armor thinned beneath the Panzer's nose. The explosion erupted inside the German hull, belching black fire out of the driver's hatch. The Panzer lurched, tracks stuttering, turret slowing mid-motion like a dying heartbeat. But it didn't fall. Not yet. Panzer IV rarely died cleanly. "Again!" the commander ordered. The loader slammed in another round, hands blistered. The gunner steadied his aim through the haze. The Panzer's turret twitched. Not fully dead, not fully alive. Its cannon dipped slightly. Was it going to fire? "Take the shot!" The Sherman's third round struck directly beneath the Panzer's turret ring. A blinding geyser of flame burst upward. The turret lifted 2 inches, just enough to show the internal overpressure had ripped through the crew compartment. The Panzer sagged, stopped, burned. And then the explosion came. A belch of fire through every crack of the German machine. A plume of smoke rising like a dark flag surrendering to the sky. The infantry erupted from the hedgerows, charging into the clearing, clearing the last firing positions, shouting with a mixture of shock, adrenaline, and disbelief. The Rhino lay dead, but victorious in the breach, still blocking any retreat. The Sherman rumbled forward past the wreck, into the field that had been the Germans' anchor. Behind them, the hedgerow, once impenetrable, lay shredded. Before them, the corridor widened. The commander whispered into the radio, voice shaking but steady. "Breakthrough confirmed. Push everything forward. We hold this gap. We widen it. We move." But the truth was sharper, colder. The battle wasn't over, not even close. The Germans hadn't expected Culin's invention. Now they knew it existed. And when the enemy understands what you're doing, the real fight begins. The smoke from the burning panzer curled upward in slow, winding spirals, merging with the dust still settling over the breach. Flames licked through its open hatches, casting a flickering orange pulse across the collapsed hedgerow. The Rhino lay motionless beside it, a twisted, half-melted carcass of metal, its blades bent like broken ribs. It had died in the gap it created, sealing the way forward with its own body. But the corridor was open, wide, jagged, alive. The commander's Sherman pushed deeper into the next field, crawling past the wreckage. The infantry fanned out around it, rifles aimed at every shadow. For the first time since the fight began, the hedgerow ahead wasn't the enemy's shield. It was the Americans' doorway. The radio crackled with shaken voices. Panzer knocked out. Rhino disabled in the breach. Infantry moving up. Field clear. Armor column approaching from the rear. Reinforcements incoming. Momentum, real momentum, surged through the line. But the commander didn't relax. His heart still hammered against his ribs, breath still sharp from the close brush with death. This wasn't triumph. Not yet. This was the moment after a storm breaks, when silence feels like a trap. He climbed halfway out of the hatch, scanning the edges of the new field. The hedgerows here looked the same as all the others. Dense, ancient, patient. But they weren't obstacles anymore. They were shapes waiting to be cut open. Geography waiting to be rewritten by Culin's idea. Behind him, the infantry lieutenant jogged toward the Rhino's wreck. He stopped beside the tank, placed a hand on the scorched hull, and lowered his head for a single, silent moment. No words. None needed. Everyone understood what it had done. "Commander," the lieutenant called out, "your tank saved us, but that one—" He nodded toward the Rhino. "It changed everything." The commander nodded once. "We moved because they died in the right place." A grim truth. A soldier's truth. Another Sherman rolled up behind them. One of the tanks fitted with Culin's early blade design. Its teeth were clean, sharpened, almost pristine compared to the Rhino's battered fangs. More Rhinos were coming. Entire platoons of them. Word had spread fast, too fast for the Germans to adjust before the Americans capitalized. But the Germans weren't idle. The commander could feel it. Somewhere ahead, another defensive knot was forming. New ambushes being prepared. New angles being chosen. Normandy didn't surrender its advantage easily. Mortar rounds thumped again in the distance. Not at them, but farther east. A retreat signal. Or a regrouping. Hard to tell. German communication lines were chaotic now. The hedgerow network they relied upon had been pierced, punctured, turned unpredictable. Another radio call broke through. "Recon aircraft reports German armor shifting north of your corridor. They're moving reserves." Of course they were. The Germans were brilliant at improvising under pressure. When the battlefield changed, they changed with it. Fast, ruthless, efficient. The commander knew the next fight wouldn't resemble this one. The Germans wouldn't wait politely behind the next hedge. They'd counterattack. Hard. Soon. He keyed his radio. "Get those new Rhinos up front. We're not stopping." The second Rhino tank crept forward, its fresh blades catching morning light. Clean. Sharp. Ready. This one hadn't been baptized yet, but it would be soon. The infantry reorganized, forming a wedge around the tanks. Their movements were calmer now. Focused. Precise. They'd crossed a line that had seemed impossible hours ago. That does something to men. Makes them believe in openings where none existed. The commander dropped into the turret again. The loader tapped a new shell into the rack. The driver rested his hands lightly on the controls, waiting for the next blind turn inside the bocage. "Commander," the gunner murmured, "you think they know what we're doing now?" "Yes," he said. "Then what happens next?" The commander looked at the broken hedgerow behind them, the cratered earth, the burning panzer, the sacrificed Rhino, and then at the hedgerow ahead, still unbroken, still bracing for its turn. "What happens next?" he repeated. He lifted the headset, speaking to every tank in the corridor. We keep moving, before they figure out how to stop us. Because that was the truth carved into every battle. Once the enemy understands your idea, your window closes. Right now the window was still open, barely, and the Americans were climbing through it before it slammed shut. The new Rhino revved, its blades tilted downward like a creature sniffing the next wall it would devour. The infantry tightened formation. Another Sherman rolled forward, its turret scanning. The commander raised his hand. Forward. The line moved, and somewhere in the distance, beyond miles of hedgerow-laced farmland, a German officer was already radioing a warning. Americans have modified their tanks. Unknown device. Cuts through bocage. The war had shifted. The Germans felt it. The Americans felt it. And Culin, wherever he was at this moment, had no idea yet that his impossible invention had just changed the entire geometry of Normandy. The new Rhino crawled toward the next hedge, blades sharp, engines steady. But the urgency that had driven the fight minutes earlier was different now. Not weaker, not calmer, just transformed. What had begun as desperation had become momentum. A push that felt less like survival and more like inevitability. The commander's Sherman rolled behind the Rhino, its hull streaked with earth and smoke, its barrel still warm. The corridor they had carved was widening by the minute, a jagged wound slicing through the bocage that German commanders had once believed invulnerable. Messages were already racing through the enemy ranks, frantic, confused. They are coming through the hedges. They have machines that cut the earth. They appear where they should not be. Fear spreads faster than orders. The infantry stepped through the torn hedge like stepping from one world into another, from confinement into movement. From terrain that dictated their deaths into terrain they could dictate. Every yard forward was stolen from an enemy who believed centuries-old walls would last forever. But the battle didn't pause to admire the invention that made it possible. More Rhinos pushed forward from the rear, their welded teeth gleaming, each one a promise of another breach. 3 days from now, an entire armored division would be equipped with Culin's cutters. A week later, nearly every Sherman in Normandy would carry them, crude steel welded by sleep-deprived mechanics in fields, barns, on tank decks, beside burning vehicles. Culin's idea was spreading faster than news of victory. But the story didn't stay in the commander's hands. It didn't stay in the bocage. It didn't even stay in the week of the breakthrough. History would remember something far more absurd than the battle itself. It would remember the moment, the exact moment, that a general stepped out of a jeep, stared at Culin's welded jaws on a Sherman, and asked in a flat, incredulous voice, "Who invented this?" Sergeant Curtis Culin stepped forward, helmet low, uniform stained with grease, expecting reprimand or mockery. He still wasn't used to attention, still preferred the shadows, still didn't believe his idea mattered beyond the next hedgerow. The general looked him up and down. "A gardener?" he asked. "No, sir." "You design farm tools?" "No, sir." "Then how in God's name did you think of this?" Culin didn't know how to explain it. He wasn't trying to be clever. He wasn't trying to be brilliant. He wasn't trying to be remembered. He just hated watching men die because the terrain told them to. He answered the only way that felt honest. "I saw what wasn't working, sir, so I built something that did." The general stared at him. Then he nodded once. And once was enough. Within 48 hours, American armor smashed through 300 German field positions, strong points that had held against artillery, nests that had resisted infantry, ambush sites that had swallowed tanks, all torn open by steel fangs welded in a field by a sergeant no one had listened to until the moment he was right. The Germans later wrote about the shock, how American tanks appeared out of hedgerows like ghosts, how their defensive map unraveled in hours, how a front they believed immovable simply moved. Every breakthrough begins with disbelief. But no one who'd been in those fields would forget how it began. Not with a speech, not with orders, not with strategy. With something quieter, smaller, stranger. A mechanic's mind, a farmer's logic, a scrap of stolen German steel, a shape welded in the dark. An idea so absurd soldiers laughed at it, until it split open the war. Years later, when veterans of Normandy were asked what saved them from the bocage, they didn't mention tactics or doctrines or even bravery. They mentioned the Rhino, the ugly, ridiculous, impossible Rhino. And when they mentioned Culin, they didn't speak of genius or invention or legacy. They spoke of a man who saw a wall no one believed could be broken, and broke it anyway. The commander, remembering the Rhino that died in the breach, would say it best. "We thought we were trapped by the hedges, Turns out we were only waiting for someone to give them teeth. History rarely changes in a single breath. But on that morning in Normandy, it did.